Hey, shout out, folks. It's Bob the Old Rucker, and thanks for listening to Shout Out from the Pit. Just a few admin notes before we launch into our show. First, thanks for the great feedback. It keeps Redbeard and I motivated, knowing we're doing something positive and we're on the right track. Reminders, we're always looking for folks to share their experience, strength, and hope. If you've overcome something and you have a toolbox that can provide others with hope to overcome their challenges, let us know. Check out shoutoutfromthepit.com and briefly share your story under our contact tab. Redbeard or I will reach out to you for a chat and talk about doing a show. Also, we're still working towards launching 1 Minute Epiphanies. You know how you get those crazy, awesome thoughts, like on the trail, in the shower, during meditation, or even during church worship, and you just want to shout it from the mountaintop? Well, you can do that in one of several ways. On the website, there's an unmonitored phone number. You've got about 90 seconds to share your epiphany with us, and Redbeard will work his magic. Or you can leave your thoughts under the contact tab, and one of us will read it on the show. And finally, you can upload your thoughts. Just follow the instructions on the website. Please remember to give us just your first name and what state or country you're from. Please be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with a friend because, hey, it's for free and for fun. Okay, here's what to expect from this show. David M. has successfully traveled his recovery journey for quite a while. You've heard us talk plenty about getting involved. David's immersion includes decades of gathering and sharing the history behind Alcoholics Anonymous, and today he's sharing that with us. As an added bonus, Jeremy, whose episode is episode 30, introduced David and I and is the co-host on this show. Jeremy is just a fantastic individual with an amazing recovery journey. So I'm always honored to have somebody like that guy on our show. Okay, without further ado, and now on with the show. Hey, shout out, folks. It's Bob the Old Rucker coming at you raw and uncensored. And as always, only God knows what's going to happen on this show. Welcome to Shout Out from the Pit, where the host sucks, but the guests are awesome. I'm the host, and Redbeard, the nerd in the basement, as he says, is my partner and producer and is not with us today. He's out on vacay. God bless him. Our goal is to bring stories and topics designed to add to your toolbox as you trudge the road to happy destiny. So joining us today are a couple of guys I've known for a while, one more than the other, and I'm getting ready to get to know you better, David. But Jeremy, give us a shout out.
Hey, everybody, it's Jeremy. Glad to be back, Bob. Thanks for having me here to, listen to David talk, man. I'm looking forward to this because I've known David for a while, but I really don't know a lot about David.
David?
Hey, everybody. I'm David. I am an alcoholic. And is this where we do the usual thing and give sobriety dates and all that stuff?
Nah, that'll come in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I got to throw something stupid out first.
Oh, well, okay.
Kind of known for that because I'm not altogether the highest IQ in the room, so I got to throw an icebreaker out. All right, so before we get started, this is a random, useless fact. Okay. Did you know that humans invented alcohol before they invented the wheel?
Did not know that.
Yeah. Pause for effect. Okay. So I got this random useless fact, and I just thought this was crazy, but it's kind of funny. But so the wheel came on the scene about 3,500 BC, about 5,000 years ago. That alcohol was discovered. Let me see if I can get this name right. So my Chinese friends out there, forgive me, I'm going to say this crazy, right? Qiao Tou, China. And it's about 9,000 years ago. They found residue of alcohol on pottery. They also found 2 skeletons with it, and they don't know if it was a funeral or if it was a party gone south. But that's what they discovered 9,000 years ago before the wheel was invented. Now, listen, I could digest and dissect this thing all day long, but that was the random fact that I found on the web. So thanks, Dr. Google. All right, so Jeremy, you shared your story with us recently. Your story's getting ready to come out on the air, so thank you again for that. But at that time, you also... of course, I've known you for quite a few years, and that all, guys, if you want to, I think that's going to be episode 30. So, I encourage you guys, if you haven't heard the show already, please listen to it. Jeremy, your story is awesome. And at the time that we were talking about the history behind Alcoholics Anonymous. And, some of us in the room were kind of baffled, like, I don't know that. I don't know. It's just, it's funny. The very program that got us on the journey of recovery that we're enjoying life so much today, a lot of us didn't even know the origins other than, it was founded by Dr. Bob and Bill. And if you want to read, The Good Old Boys and some of those other books that are in my library here, which are really difficult to digest because of the writing at that time. And then, then we can learn more about the history. But then you mentioned David and the years that he has in the archives. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Jeremy, and tell me how this came about for you, and then introduce our guest, and then David. Like we said, we don't have any idea which direction the show is going to go. We're going to go with the flow. To you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. David is. I was thinking about, like, how do you introduce David? And the thing that I can come up with is selflessness and service. That's how I can introduce David. So I met David, and I don't even really know the exact day in which I met him. He was at the group that is now my home group whenever I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous this time, and decided that this was going to end up being somewhere that I stayed. And, you show up to a meeting and the room is set up, the coffee's made. And, when you walk out the door, you don't think anything about, who's taking and putting the room back the way that it is. You just think you show up and it magically appears that way. And as I got to know David a little bit, I realized that, there's this one guy that shows up early for every single meeting, and he sets the room up. And when we show up, the room is ready to go for us to have a meeting and for a newcomer to walk in the door. And whenever we get done with the meeting, we all walk away, but there's one guy that stays and makes sure that the room is put back exactly the way that it's supposed to be. And that guy is David. Then everywhere I started going in Alcoholics Anonymous, whether it was district or area and all of these things, David is showing up, and he's doing the archive stuff. When a question comes up in our meeting about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, David pops in, and all of a sudden, here is this knowledge of how the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, specifically the history of Alcoholics Anonymous in Arkansas, came to be. And I find it extremely fascinating and intriguing. And all of the history that I know of Alcoholics Anonymous comes from David, because he's an extremely knowledgeable person. But the biggest thing that I can say about him is I go back to that initial statement: selfless service. David puts Alcoholics Anonymous and other people before himself always. He rarely takes his own self into account. And for that, I'm just really grateful that I get to know him.
David, how do you follow an introduction like that?
Jeremy doesn't know me very well because I'm a very selfish and self-centered bastard.
Well, we have that in common. All right.
I tried to get sober initially in 2005. That one didn't quite take. I did manage to get my first sponsor during that period. He just happened to be a member of Bridging the Gap. When I came back after my sabbatical, my in-between sabbatical, I came back to his home group. I didn't ask him to be my sponsor again, but I have only had one home group the whole time that I have been. And when I went out, I didn't stay out very long because at that point, it did not take very long for me to run up. Let's just say that I was already well in debt, and the 3 months or so that I was out, I managed to double or triple that amount. So when I came back, I was ready to change at least part of things. When I came back, it took me a while to decide that the program was something that I really wanted. Luckily for me, the fellowship was there, and my first sponsor gave me one thing that was very important to me, and that was he gave me a copy of the Threshold, and he said, this is the meeting you're going to go to on Sunday, and this is the one you're going to go to on Monday, and this one on Tuesday, and this one on Wednesday, and this one on Thursday. So when I came back, I knew where the meetings were. I had been to them. So it was, luckily the fellowship allowed me to ride them for about 6 months. Well, let's just say that in the process of getting here, I had I never did manage to get myself put in jail. I got arrested at least once, and the people that I was running around with that made that possible were some of them were in prison, and there was a trial, and I was subpoenaed for that trial, and let's just say that fear got in the way of my comfort, and so I suddenly decided it might be a good idea to get a sponsor and start working some steps. Now, I had an ulterior motive. The gentleman that I asked to be my sponsor happened to be an attorney.
Okay.
As it turned out, I was not called on to testify because the person that was on trial decided that he didn't need to tell the people that it was not his fault. So he went on to his whatever term that he had that particular time. But I had already made the commitment that I was going to work steps. So we actually got, I remember we got up at least into 6 and 7 because we spent a lot of time on 6 and 7. And I also have a history of not being able to keep a sponsor very long for the most part. He decided to leave the country a few months after we started working together. The next gentleman that I asked to be my sponsor left the state a little bit after we'd worked the steps. And unfortunately, I have spent way too many years and months and whatnot doing the ism, sponsoring myself. But
David, I can identify my first 2 sponsors passed away. My third sponsor is nervous, by the way. That was a joke. Catch that as jokes over your head. David, you don't strike me. You know how we have stereotypical appearances of people, and like that guy's been rode hard, put away wet. You don't have that demeanor about you. I mean, for what it's worth, I got my first marriage was done by a Catholic priest. I'm not Catholic. That's another story. His name was Father Leroy. You have some characteristics about you that remind me of him. I want to call you Father David. So, you look very relaxed and laid back. So, congratulations on that. You don't have that appearance. So just an observation I want to throw out at you. And you said another thing that I think is so key, and I don't want to lose this. You said you guys spent a lot of time on steps 6 and 7. Those are notorious steps from my experience and listening to a lot of people that get blown off. And I want to hit on that for a little bit. Can you tell me what steps in 6 and 7 are and why you guys spent so much time on it?
I can't really tell you why we spent so much time on it, other than the fact that, in the book, 6 and 7 take up, 2 paragraphs?
Right. Right.
Luckily, Bill went back and wrote the 12 and 12, because if he hadn't, there's a whole bunch of questions that most of us would have had that wouldn't have had any answers. In the big book, it gives you the idea that you're going to do 6 and 7 in about 5 minutes at most. And I have come to the conclusion that that's one of those things that is very disillusioning to people that have actually tried to work the steps as they were envisioned, as opposed to the way the book showed them initially. And that is that you have to do 6 and 7 constant. And I will put it this way. I was not impressed the first time that I worked with my first sponsor as far as doing the steps 4 and 5. This gentleman was not an Arkansan. He came to us from the Northwest, and he did not really understand anything about the way we do AA in Arkansas. He became acquainted with the Little Rock Approach program, and he actually had me do a worksheet talk or two before we stopped working together. But he didn't really understand anything about the way the Little Rock Approach program was laid out. So he also didn't spend a whole lot of time explaining how you do steps 4. And he got real impatient when we were doing step 5. And the second time that I did step 5, it took a whole day. I was very grateful that I had a sponsor that was willing to spend a whole day with me to do step 5. But initially, the first time that I did steps 4 and 5, I didn't learn a whole lot. I mean, I had already, quote, confessed everything to my first sponsor when I was in the process of asking him to be my sponsor. So he knew the worst about me, at least, before he ever agreed to sponsor. And I don't know where I was going with that exactly, except that I feel like I have been blessed and cursed with some of the sponsors that I've had, because some of them I didn't take sufficient advantage of, and others didn't have to give what I needed to have.
That kind of speaks to an individual's program. We've self-identified that coming into the program, we're selfish manipulators. We know how to get over on people. We know how to lie, cheat, steal, whatever. We also know how far we're willing to work this program. There are great people in the program that work a great program, but they're also kind of hands off when it comes. Yeah, I'll be a sponsor, but I'm kind of hands off. Kind of do your thing and report back to me, at your leisure, right? That's the kind of guys I wanted, right? Jeremy, you alluded to this actually in our talk. So what are your thoughts on that as far as working a program, getting a sponsor that's going to be engaged or not?
Yeah, I think that it's very important. And I think, I've got a question for David here in just a second about that, because for me, my sponsor was always hands-on. Like, my sponsor was willing to sit down and spend plenty of time with me to work through the steps as we went. And when it came to step 4, we spent a lot of time talking about it. And I do that with the guys that I sponsor now. Whenever we're talking about that 4th step, we're talking very in depth about how this is done. There are strict time limits on when it's to be done. For me, it's one of the most critical steps that we take is that 4th step. Now, it was one of the scariest steps that I took whenever I was trying in the process of getting sober. But the thing that I would be curious about, David, is you said that he didn't really explain things. Did he just say, here's the book, go do it? I mean, like whatever, my guys, I give them, we read the book and we talk about it. And then I actually give them a worksheet to kind of help guide them along the path.
The first time that I did it, did a 4th step, that was basically it. I guess that we probably were working with both the big book and the 12 and 12 at that point, because it was definitely the 12 and 12 that we were doing when we did 6 and 7, because we spent weeks on that. But as far as the 4th step was concerned, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So it was very difficult for me to figure out exactly what needed to go on there and what information was going to get gleaned. And I don't know, I'm not trying to be derogatory about this gentleman because I love him dearly, but let's just say that he's probably not the sponsor that I should have had, at least not initially. That being said, I'm not using my current sponsor nearly as much as I should, even though I talk to him all the time. He's more than willing to help me with anything that I ask him to do. When I asked him to sponsor me, it was because I was in desperate need of somebody to help me in the service struggle. I asked him to sponsor me as a service sponsor back when I was the alternate DCM, because I didn't
Can you just say what DCM is?
District committee member. I didn't have any idea exactly what my responsibilities were. I had been a GSR for Bridging the Gap for 3 years because my predecessor decided to go do research some more research before he completed his term as GSR. And
And GSR is
Group Service Representative.
Okay.
Anyway, I felt like I needed to have someone that I could talk to who had been district committee member back right around the turn of the century. And so I knew that he already knew how to do all of that stuff, not to mention the fact that he was one of the founding members of our home group. And so I knew that he was familiar with all of those ins and outs, and I did have to use him on several occasions. One of the things that he pointed out to me was that I was not the AA police. I have a bad tendency to try to tell people what to do and what not to do.
Tell me what that looks like. I mean, because I have heard that before, AA police, and then you just said to do, not to do. What can you humbly, step 6 and 7, can you with some humility, give me an example of what that looks like?
Well, I don't know whether I can give you an example, but I can be very bossy when I think that I'm right about something, and I think you're wrong. And there were a few things that came up when I was DCM that were iffy, that I needed to have some guidance as to what direction I need. There are certain things in the 12 traditions that some people take as rigid laws, and I can be very rigid at times. I can be very lax at times, too, depending upon what my mood and motivation is at the time. I'm trying to think of a good example, but I really can't, because, see, I have to be in the middle of one before I realize that you're trying to be the AA police again. And
I can think of plenty of examples where I've stepped on hand grenades. I just don't want to, bring the light to myself. So, Jeremy, you got any ideas on that? Because it's such a great topic in itself. We could do a whole show on the AA police. But what would be? It doesn't have to be a personal experience or even an anecdotal. But what would be, in your opinion, an example of that's probably not appropriate at this time to be the AA police? What might be a good example of it?
Well, I can tell you, like my experience is when I walk into a meeting and you're not doing it the way that I think you should do it, then you're doing it wrong, because that's not the way my group does it. And that's not the way we do it in Arkansas. And that's not the way that, you should be running your meetings. And I think that we can all fall into that category. I think the question is, for me, the question becomes, where am I at that particular moment? And I think David alluded to it. Sometimes I'm better at it than others. And, there was one meeting that I would go to early on in sobriety, and man, I hated this meeting, but I went to it every Friday night. And my sponsor's like, if you don't think they're doing it right, why do you keep going back? Well, I'm going to change them, because we're going to make them do it the way that they're supposed to do it. And he's like, Jeremy, you've got 8 months of sobriety. What are you going to change? And I'm like, bingo, just stop going to that meeting and go continue to grow in spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Well, and I'm not trying to throw religion under the bus here, but because I categorize myself as a Christian, but born again Christian syndrome, applies kind of like in the sobriety too, like I've seen the light, and this is what you got to do. And like, how long have you been sober? Well, long enough. I got about a week, it's like, well, maybe you're going to exercise. You could learn to exercise the physiology of having, 2 ears and one mouth for the first time in your life, and it's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It took a long time for me to be a listener. I brought a lot of my own isms into the program, and I see so many new guys doing it. And that's what made me think of this. I see new people coming in and they want to, they'll go to area, and the box, where you want to not draw attention to yourself, but you want things to be heard. And you guys know Mark. He's in your home group. I love how Mark handles those things, man. He is the king. And he just handles them with such grace and humility. Whereas if I was in his shoes or behind that microphone, I'd be like, okay, who asked this stupid question? So I've still got some learning to do too, which is why I am not in the capacity that you guys have held at the district level. I go, I attend. I certainly don't want to be in a capacity at the area level. I've got a lot of growing to do too, which is why we hosted steps 6 and 7 here at my house for over 2 years because of me. I put that group together because I was like, I don't have any humility. My problem is ego. So I brought by invitation and I told them, bring anybody you want. We had this place packed, which is now our studio. So, and there's the books below right here. And then we moved into step 10 and did that for, we did Drop the Rock and then the Ripple Effect. And that was all for me. So I told these guys every single time, man, guys, thanks for 12-stepping me today because those were my absolute areas of weakness. So when you brought that up, David, step 6 and 7, man, ding, 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 all over the place. I have to work those every day. And I'm grateful for people that are in my inner circle. My most inner circle, of course, is my battle buddy, my wife. She keeps me in check regularly. And I got 1 of 2 choices. I could divorce her because of my ego, or I could grow, but then it's not just her. I've got the tribe that you hear us talk about on the show quite a bit. And you're more than welcome to, it's not exclusive. It's just a bunch of guys that ended up meeting here, So I love that you said steps in 6 and 7 because the first time I went through this program, you mentioned how brief it is in the big book. I blew right through it and I used this stupid logic. If it's not really mentioned that much in the big book, then it really isn't that important in the 12 by 12. Personal logic, right? He who counsels with himself counsels with a fool. That's me. So yeah, now that we've digressed again, I wanted to ask you, because it's kind of like in the history of things, and I never understood where this came from. But you mentioned GCR, DCM, and let's expound a little bit on that from this perspective. Where did that upside down triangle come from? What's the backstory behind that? That our foundation. How do I say that better? I need you to explain that better for the audience before we start talking about those other positions in there, because I don't know how to describe that.
Well, I can tell you what the upside down triangle means. I cannot really tell you exactly how it was determined that that's the way it was going to be, except that it was known that the people that the groups were in charge, and as a result of that, everybody else was there to support the group because that's where the work was done. So as a result of that, the whole service structure is based on eventually getting down to the General Service Conference as far as us peons are concerned. The board does all the legal stuff, but all of the decisions about where the fellowship is supposed to be going is made at the General Service Conference in New York in April of every year. And
would it be an easier visual for the audience to, we see an inverted triangle, but if we imagined it more like a funnel, large at the top, that's where all the groups are across the world, right? And then it works its way down to at the bottom tippy point is the GSO.
Well, the General Service Board is there they are the only legal entity that we have, but they are there to specifically to carry out what the fellowship needs to have done. I've always been told that it's supposed to be a two-way communication, that the groups tell the group is supposed to tell their district committee member what they need. And that district committee member is supposed to pass that on to the area delegate. And the area delegate is supposed to take that to New York for the 2 years that they go and present all of that information and talk it over with everybody else in the United States and Canada. Out of that comes a direction for theoretically what's supposed to happen. I have listened to a lot of General Service Conference reports, and some of those get rather, let's say, contentious, and some of them get involved in what we're not supposed to get involved in, which is personalities. But and there are things that come out of it that I don't agree with, and I can try to be the AA police, but that's really part of my job too, because if I think that they have done something that I don't agree with, then I need to let them know that I don't agree with it. Sometimes I'm reticent about doing that, and I have to remember when I'm doing something in the service structure that I am there to make sure that the message gets given to the drunk who still sucks. And that's the only reason for having the service structure in the first place. You know, when AA first started, we didn't have a service structure. There wasn't a service structure until Bob decided that Bill decided that Dr. Bob was dying, and something had to be done because Bill wasn't going to be around forever to make all the decisions that they had been making on an individual basis, as opposed to having help make those decisions. And that's when Bill came up with the idea for the General Service Conference. And that idea, he had to convince people that that's what needed to happen, because the members that were on the board at the time didn't think that needed to happen. Luckily, they changed their mind, and there was a 5-year period of trial in the early 50s, and they discovered that, people around the country did have some ideas, and they did know what needed to happen. And as a result of that, the General Service Conference has been around for a little while now. One of the we have an international convention every 5 years. This was one of the 5 years, and the next one is going to be in St. Louis. Well, in 1955, we had the International Convention in St. Louis, and that particular one is the one that Bill gave the fellowship the program. In other words, it was no longer Bill and Bob. It was now, the fellowship was responsible to keep it going. And that was the one that, shortly after that, Bill wrote AA Comes of Age, because that's what that convention was about. That was when AA left the Bill and Bob phase and came into the fellowship phase. And
wow. Okay, I didn't know. Sorry, got to get closer. I didn't know that. I always wondered, just because I've read those books. God bless people that are wired to understand it, because it's difficult reading. And a lot of it just has to do with the culture and the way that, we use language at that time. But I always saw Bill, and I'm making this up because this is just my perspective, but you really just kind of helped solidify some thoughts that have been bouncing around in my head. I always saw Bill as the visionary guy, and, Dr. Bob, kind of the guy that was his anchor. Like, Bill, you ready to fly off? We need to keep it grounded here. Just based on some of the readings and the arguments that were contentious, as you said, putting together some of the literature, especially the big book, the higher power concept, all that kind of stuff. In fact, when I don't know if it was his dying words, but in Dr. Bob's final words was like, "Bill, let's not screw this up." And I think that when I read that, I thought, man, there's such power in there for Bill to walk away from that going, I could really screw this up. I could really do some damage to this, because obviously the guy had a huge ego. I can identify with him a lot, and he needed somebody. And I think Bob was his anchor. And as Bob's transitioning to the next life, Bill had to make that conscious decision to let go of his baby, because it was his for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where this general conference stuff started coming in.
Yeah.
You mentioned one other thing, and I just want to ask your thoughts on this. Because of the some of the challenges and the headbutting that I read from some of those things, is that I have to look at my notes here. This is something I have to read every day for myself. So no, I don't normally tell people that, but I have to read this. Responsibility statement came out of the 30th Anniversary International Convention, 1965. Who, I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that, I am responsible. You had made a profound comment a little bit ago that all these the structure and everything about it, the main purpose is to be there for the drunk, right?
Correct.
Okay. Was this responsibility statement, was that founded or somebody bring that to the forefront because of what you just said? Were they getting off track and it started going down a rabbit trail and they're like, guys, we got to remember why we're here? I'm going to pass that to you because that's always kind of been bouncing around in my head. Why did that come up?
I did not. I probably knew the answer to that question at one point, but I can't answer it. I don't really remember that. It would have been in something that I read, and of course, there was another much less used statement that came up in the next international convention, the Statement of Unity that that almost nobody uses anymore because it's much more difficult to remember than the statement, the Declaration of Purpose.
I'm not sure I'm even familiar with that one. If Dr. Google can help me with that.
To this we owe the fellowship or whatever it is. Anyways, it's the Statement of Unity. And it came up at the Toronto convention after that one, after the one in wherever it was in California.
So, David, now one question that I have is, so we know that Bill and Bob are essentially the brain children behind Alcoholics Anonymous. At that point in time, though, when they both first got sober, the only thing out there was the Oxford group. Is that correct? And they had a 6-step program. Why did they not stick with the Oxford group? And you may not know the answer to this question, and that's fine, but why didn't they stick with that, and why did they?
Well, first of all, the Oxford group did not have steps, period. They had the 4 absolutes or whatever they were called, and they incorporated all the things that ended up in the steps. The reason that all of that got started was that Bob was one of those people that had religious issues, and he knew that he needed help in trying to stop drinking because he had tried several times. It just so happened that he had started working with the Oxford group sometime before he finally got, about 2 years before he finally got sober. And the meeting that really basically started it all, that the meeting that Dr. Bob confessed to the members of the Oxford group that he had a drinking problem and that he wanted help with. That was how Henrietta Seiberling got involved in all of that. And that's how she happened to be the person that connected Bill and Bob.
So tell us, if you don't mind, what you can about her backstory. How did she come on the scene, and how did she connect the two?
She was a member of the Oxford group in Akron. She was hosting the meeting the day that, like I said, that Dr. Bob admitted finally to somebody that he had a drinking problem. Because that was one of those things. He didn't think anybody thought that he had a drinking, even though probably 9/10 of Akron knew, if they knew him at all, knew that he had a drinking problem. We have a great ability to delude ourselves about a lot of things. So Henrietta was directing that particular meeting that morning, and she asked if Dr. Bob wanted them to pray for him, and he said yes, and all that other good stuff. Anyway, she had continued to pray, and when Bill went to Akron to try to take over whichever company it was that he was trying to take over, when he had his experience in the Mayflower Hotel and tried to decide whether he was going to go down the hall to the bar or whether he was going to. That was when he realized that he needed another alcoholic to work with just as badly as they needed him. He went to the telephone instead of going into the bar, and he made a number of phone calls. And one of those people that he made a phone call to was a Reverend Tunks. And this Reverend Tunks was not a member of the Oxford group, but he knew members of the Oxford. And he directed Bill to call Henrietta Seiberling. She was the one that knew that Dr. Bob needed help with his alcoholism, and so she put him together. Bob was not real happy about doing that because this was like the day before Mother's Day or something, and he had just brought in a potted plant, and he was potted as much as the plant was. So he did not feel like physically that he needed to be going anywhere, and so the arrangement was made that they would go the next day. And so that's how all of that got together. The fellowship probably wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for that.
I've heard Oxford group mentioned ad infinitum throughout my recovery journey. What are the origins behind the Oxford group? What was their purpose and design?
I have not read the book on Frank Bookman, who was the founder of the Oxford group. Who was it that I heard a dissertation on him within the last week? Oh, I know who it was. It was Lee at the meeting on Monday, talking about Frank Bookman. He had an interesting history, and some of it was less than desirable. But the information that he basically, his premise was that he was there to be of service and that it was not all about him. So I can't remember how all of that got started as far as the Oxford group having a group in Akron. I'd have to go back and research it again,
but maybe in a synopsis type of thing here, just to get us to where Alcoholics Anonymous is today. Was the Oxford group designed as service work, but religious based?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with alcoholism at all. It's just that luckily they were open-minded enough that they allowed a bunch of drunks to come in and meet with them. And they were more than happy to share what they had learned. Luckily, because had they not, we wouldn't have 12 steps to deal with, because all of the principles that the 12 steps are based on came from the Oxford group.
And you said that they had, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 absolutes that the steps came from. But so this guy, Frank Bookman, put this Oxford group together with these 4 absolutes, so people would just be better people in their community? What was the reason for it?
Frank Bookman was I've forgotten which denomination he was a member of, but he was a preacher.
Okay.
And he had, as I understood it, he had a resentment, and that resentment was what led him to the resolution of that resentment was what led him to the realization of everything that he put together as far as the Oxford group was concerned. And the reason, as far as I know, is that it was called the Oxford group is because he happened to be in England at the time that all of that happened.
Okay. Oxford, England. Okay.
I'm not even going to go into all of that because quite frankly, that's not something that was anything that I had a whole lot of information that I gleaned as far.
Sure. I'm curious where Bob and Bill, it was more Dr. Bob's affiliation with the Oxford group. So he was a member of that group?
Okay. Bob and Ann had been going to Oxford group meetings for a couple of years.
His wife, Ann.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just saying it for the audience.
Right. She's the one that probably made it possible for Bob to continue living as long as he did. There's lots of interesting history about how they got together, too. But they had been trying to come up with a way, or Bob had been trying to figure out some way that he could get sober. And that was one of the reasons that they started going to the Oxford group meetings. Bob had, let's say, less than thrilling experience with religion. And so as a result of that, he found it difficult he accepted that the Oxford group had things that were helpful, but he didn't get the connection between his alcoholism and how that could help him. That was one of those things that the meeting between Bill and Bob made possible, because Bill brought the idea, thanks to Dr. Silkworth, that alcoholism was a disease, that it wasn't a character issue. It was something that affected you mentally and physically, and it wasn't just a matter of being weak or whatever. Bob had not had that information up until that point. Everything that he had done had been the spiritual angle, except there was no physical angle to go along with it. So he could not make that connection. It wasn't until Bill brought the message to him that he understood. Of course, like most of us, he didn't get it right away. Once you have a mental obsession and a physical allergy and all that other good stuff, it doesn't leave you overnight. That's why it took a little while before Dr. Bob was able to not have to. It took his being willing finally to do the thing that he knew he had to do, which was to go and get rid of the idea that he hadn't, that nobody knew anything about his alcoholism, and that he had a rather strange way of working the steps, because he basically worked step 9 in one day. And after that, he never drank again.
Okay, let me do a quick synopsis, and then maybe we can take a small break. So we've got Bob that's actively drinking, Dr. Bob actively drinking. That's part of the Oxford group, thanks to his wife Anne, but he's not connecting the fact that he's an alcoholic. He's just, I don't know, part of a decent group, because I don't really know anything about the Oxford group or what their purpose was. And at the same time, we have Bill that is there on business, and he's got to make a choice between going to a bar and picking up a phone. And somehow he gets connected with Henrietta that puts these two guys together. Am I tracking so far? Mm-hmm. All right. So let's come back to that after a small break and pick up from there. All right. Welcome back to Shout Out from the Pit. And again, our guests with us today are Jeremy and David. And so we left off talking about how the fellows got together. And before we go back to that, there was a lingering question in my mind about the upside down triangle, and I was trying to give a visual of a funnel. I don't know if I tripped all over that or not, but I'm going to defer to Jeremy to give us a little bit more insight on that upside down, or I guess it's called an inverted triangle, and then we'll get back on track with the history and the archive behind Alcoholics Anonymous. So Jeremy, to you.
All right, thanks, Bob. So whenever I think about the upside down triangle, here's the way I think about that, and here's the way that I can keep it straight in my mind, is when I think about a triangle and I think about the triangle sitting on the base, what's the most strengthening part of that triangle is that base. It's the widest portion. And when we think about the largest part of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's the groups. And so what helps keep Alcoholics Anonymous afloat is the groups, and the groups out there doing the daily service work, boots on the ground, working with the alcoholics that are walking into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous on a daily basis, whether it's morning, noon, or night. We constantly have people walking in. But how does Alcoholics Anonymous work as an organization? Well, when we take that triangle and we flip it upside down and we put it on its tip, and to turn it into a funnel, as you said, Then we have the groups at the top. Now, the groups are the most important piece of that triangle. And then as the triangle or the funnel gets smaller, that gets less important. They have a less control of Alcoholics Anonymous and what is going on. And so we have at the group level, the group has a group conscience, and that group conscience is expressed through the voice of the group, through the general service rep of the group, who is the GSR. And that GSR takes that group conscience to the district. At the district, earlier you heard David talk about the district committee member and the DCM. Well, at the district level, you have the committee, which is made up of the DCM, the alternate DCM, secretary, treasurer, and registrar. And the groups. And the groups come together and hold a quorum, as I guess we can call it, once quarterly, and tell the DCM what we want done and what we want expressed to the area. Again, then we go down another notch and get a little smaller on that upside down triangle, or that funnel, as we'll call it. And now we're at the area level. In Arkansas, there's 13 districts for one area. The entire state of Arkansas is one area, and it's Area 4. Now we have a quorum of all of the districts come together to express their, desires of what their groups have shared with them to the area. And that area is made up, that quorum, the area committee is the delegate, the alternate delegate, the chair, the co-chair, treasurer, secretary, registrar. The delegate is the person that the people in Arkansas, the groups, the districts have elected to go represent them at the General Service Conference. Now we're coming down another notch in that funnel and getting a little smaller and a little tighter. So each area has a delegate, and we go to the General Service Conference. So all the areas are represented in U.S. and David, you might have to correct me. It's just U.S. and Canada. And then you have the trustees. Well, we have the General Service Board, and I'm not sure on the numbers. This is where I get a little off. But, the General Service Board is made up of alcoholics and non-alcoholics trustees. So then you have those trustees plus the trustees that were elected by the fellowship at the area level to represent the individual regions, and the folks that work in the General Service Office. They all come together with all of the delegates, trustees together to conduct the business of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that all happens at the very bottom of that triangle or funnel. And that's where the financial business of Alcoholics Anonymous, the business of books and literature and things like that are actually worked out. There are people that work in the General Service Office every single day that will answer any question you need. I refer people all the time. Hey, you've got a question about Alcoholics Anonymous, or you need to know something, send an email to the GSO staff. They're very quick to answer back and give you the answers that you need. But that's just kind of a brief understanding of the way that I understand it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you so much. I don't think I definitely couldn't have said it as well as you did, because I've never, obviously I've been to area and district, but I've only been as a GSR, right? I've never floated past that. I've seen it. I've heard it talked about. But for the audience, I wanted them to understand what that visual looked like and the purpose behind it. Now, what I don't still now we know what it is, and I guess that whole concept of that hierarchy, so to speak, came out of the conferences. Is that's where is that one of the things that came out of that?
Part of the concepts, yes. Concepts.
Perfect. Okay, because I know we got 12 steps, 12 traditions, and 12 concepts, right, which I'm really fuzzy with. But okay, good. I think we can move on unless you have some more thoughts on that, David.
Okay. So, David, when we were on break, we were talking about, and one of the questions that always gets lost for me is, we know the book came out in 1939, but Bill and Bob had been sober for a period of time prior to that. And by the time the book came out, there were 100 sober members of the fellowship. At least that's what's in the foreword of the first edition, is something, I believe the number is 100. But what year did Bill and Bob get sober, and what year did they meet?
Okay, they they met in Akron. When's Mother's Day? It's
in May.
May. They met either it would have been Mother's Day of 1935, and the fellowship birthday that we use is June the 10th, which is the day that Dr. Bob quit drinking. The fellowship had to go on between the time that they met and the time that the book got published. There was a period of time when Bill, the promoter, decided that we had to do all of these things, that we needed to establish hospitals, that we needed to we needed to hire missionaries to go out all over the country to share the message. And he also wanted to have a book published. Well, there was this big meeting of the Akron group, which was the first group of Alcoholics Anonymous in the country. And they finally decided that they would okay doing all of those things. Luckily, there was a big problem. It's known as money. All of that stuff costs lots of money. So the fellowship went around trying to involve other people and ask for money. That's how John D. Rockefeller got involved. Luckily, one of his premises was that money was going to spoil this thing if we did it that way. And that was also where we got the idea that, first of all, that the fellowship always had to be poor, and that the fellowship had to pay for itself. In other words, the members of the fellowship had to foot all the bills. So there was what happened was, I can't remember exactly which meeting it was, but they decided, okay, we'll start with the book. Luckily, in the process of getting the book produced, they went through this period when they found out that they weren't going to be able to get supported by all these rich folks, and that they let go of the idea that they needed to get involved in some of those things that they thought they needed to get involved in. First of all, they decided they didn't need to be paying people to go out and share the message. That's one of the things the program is based on, and that is one alcoholic sharing with another alcoholic. And if if you have somebody that you're paying, especially somebody that's not an alcoholic, then how in the world are they going to share a message?
Attraction via promotion.
That would have been promotion, yes. Anyway, there was that period of roughly 4 years that the fellowship was there. Initially, there were only two groups: the one that met in Bill's apartment in New York, and the one that met in Akron. Eventually, people started coming from Cleveland down to Akron for the meetings, and then they developed their own group up in Cleveland. So we had three groups, and that's basically where everything started. We had people that visited Akron mostly. If you read the stories in the back of the first edition Big Book, most of those people had started their lives in Akron, one way or another. They may not have been from Ohio, but they had gone there to access the program. Oh, good. This is where I get to segue.
Yeah. I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Little Rock, Arkansas was one of the very first groups that did not have anybody come from either New York or Ohio to start a group or even share the message. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous in Arkansas got started by one book that made it from New York to Little Rock. Actually, it started with more than one book, but that's another story. The first AA in Arkansas was Sterling C. Sterling C. actually got sober about a month after Dr. Bob did. He had a similar experience to Bill W.'s. I can't really... He was a member of a family, a upper middle class family, I guess you would call it. Most everybody in his family except him were attorneys. He had alcohol problems from very early age. He started drinking when he was a teenager, and by the time he was in his 20s, it had become a real problem. He ended up leaving. He ended up doing one of those cures that where you decide that your environment is what the problem is. So he
geographical cure.
Yeah,
yeah.
He decided, of all places, to go to New Orleans.
Okay, that'll work.
It just so happened that while he was in New Orleans, he realized that he needed to try to get sober. So he contacted some people. He contacted a psychiatrist, and he was advised that he needed to read a book by Peabody called Common Sense of Drinking, which is one of the books that Bill W. read and before he wrote the book. So he read that, and he also decided that he needed to have a spiritual angle to his recovery. So he worked with a Catholic priest while he was down there. And while he was in a dry phase, he decided that he was missing, or he and his family were missing the people back in Little Rock. So he was an insurance salesman by this time, and he had been fired basically, and that was one of the reasons why he left Little Rock. They decided they could do without his services. So he contacted them after he had been sober for a little bit, and they said that they had a place that he might be able to fit in Memphis. So he moved his family up to Memphis, and the gentleman that was in charge of the insurance agency there said that, yes, if you stay sober, I have a job for you. Well, unfortunately, you're alcoholic and you don't have a basis for staying that way. Willpower only goes so far. Well, he left Memphis to go on business to some other town in Tennessee, and he got drunk. One of the agreements had been between him and his boss that if he got drunk, that he was to immediately resign, and so that he wouldn't have to be fired. He came back to Memphis, and although his conscience was bothering him, he did not tell his boss that he had gotten drunk again. And he stayed sober for another few months, and then he went out of town again and got drunk again. He realized that he had made this promise and that it bothered him enough that he decided when he came back to Memphis that he had to tell his boss that he had gotten drunk and that he was going to have to cease his employment. He was on his way to tell his boss that, and he was met by another employee of the agency that said that his boss had died the night before. And for whatever reason, Sterling felt that even though his boss had not known about the two events in which he got drunk, that now that he was dead, that he was sure that he did know. And it caused such an upheaval in his life that he'd been working with an Episcopal priest there in Memphis. He went to see him, and the priest told him basically sort of the same sort of thing that Dr. Silkworth told Bill, that he needed to hang on to what he had because it was certainly a lot better than what he had before. That was the last drink that he ever had.
I'm sorry, I was curious. What year was that?
That was 1935.
Wow, we are literally talking 90 years ago.
Right.
Okay. And the economy during that time in the 30s, that was rough.
Yeah.
And of course we're well, not yet, but we're getting closer to World War II. And so quitting a job, finding a job in the first place wasn't easy, but quitting a job I'm just thinking of all the stuff that's going on in Sterling's life at this time. So now he's in Memphis, staying the course. And where are we at from there?
He decided after this point that he had left Little Rock owing a bunch of money to a bunch of people. And he decided he needed to go back to Little Rock. So he went back and he went back to work for the company that he had been working for. He went around to, I don't know what you call these people that, anyway, it was somebody that kept account of debts that were owed, and he went there and said, I want a list of all of the people that I owe money to. I don't care how old the bill was. And then he made restitution to all those people.
David, that's what you meant earlier before we went on break about this guy going to step 9 before he did anything else. Is this what I'm catching?
No, that was actually Dr. Bob.
Oh, that was Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sterling and Bob have this in common. Okay.
Of course, like I said, Sterling didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. There were several things that helped the fellowship get established in this country. And you have to remember that this was all before television. This was all before the internet and all that stuff. So luckily, things like publishing was very important in those days. So there were newspapers and magazines that were very helpful in getting the message that there was a group of people that were trying to help anybody that needed help with an alcoholic problem that was available. One of the there was a series of newspaper articles in Cleveland that overnight blew them into the hundreds of people that were asking for help. The same sort of thing happened in all over the country, and there were a few significant magazine articles back during that period. One of them happened to come out at the end of 1934, and it talked about Alcoholics Anonymous. Sterling, when he got sober, felt that he needed to be helping other people get sober. So he had that in common with Bill as well. Unfortunately, he didn't have the abilities that Bill had as far as bridging the gap between making it possible to get the message to the person. He'd been working with a gentleman that was a salesman for a furniture company, and Harlan was his name, and Harlan had read one of these articles, and he sent off for a copy of the Big Book. Well, unfortunately, he sent off for it COD, and by the time it finally made it to Little Rock, he was drinking again, and he had no money to go and collect. So the first Big Book that ever came to Arkansas was sent back because it didn't get paid for. The people that the insurance company that Sterling was working for, he was good friends with his bosses, and they were encouraging his work. They had one of their associates that Sterling had helped get sober, so they sent off for a copy of the book. That book was the first one that stayed in Arkansas, and that's the only one that they had for some time. It was the one that Sterling made Harlan read. He had previously made Harlan read the Peabody book, and Harlan was one of those people that had problems with religion also, and he decided that the AA book was just the Peabody book with God in it. Anyway, of course, there were a lot of people that were involved in early AA, but there are three that were very important. Harlan was AA number 2, but actually AA number 3 was the first one that actually worked the steps. And AA number 3 was Bud G. And Bud G was a newspaper man. He worked for United Press. He had been a fairly important member in publishing. He was going through a series of promotions, but he was also getting drunker every time as he got promoted. And so as a result of that, it was getting more and more difficult for him to keep a job. He apparently was a very good newspaper person, and he apparently must have been fairly good at passing on what he had learned by virtue of the fact that all of us are familiar with one of his proteges. He was Walter Cronkite's boss for a period.
Wow.
So Arkansas has a lot of worldwide connections, whether anybody thinks about it or not.
I just a couple questions. Clarification on this Peabody book. That was a common sense. What'd you call that?
Common sense of drinking.
Common sense of drinking. Okay. And so we've got Harlan, Sterling, and Bud. Are these gentlemen? Are they acquaintances trying to help each other stay sober?
Okay. Basically speaking, Harlan's first sponsor, or his main sponsor, was Sterling.
Okay.
The guy that owned the furniture company had asked Sterling to work with him.
Okay. And that was 1936, 35?
That was well, I'm not sure exactly how long they worked together before the book came. It would have been 1933 or 34, somewhere in there.
And at that point, they didn't have the book yet?
No.
Okay. And then, okay, I don't want to break your continuity here. I'm just trying to figure out where Bud fit into this trio.
I was going into
Okay.
that. Okay. One of the things after the book came, Harlan had been fired for about the umpteenth, billionth time. So he didn't have a job. So Sterling said, go to the employment agency and get a job. Tell them that you are an alcoholic and that you are trying to get sober. Well, it just so happened that the guy that Harlan ended up talking to knew about Bud G. And so he asked Harlan to go talk to him. Well, Bud G had committed himself to the state hospital for life because he had tried everything and he could not stay sober. And he committed himself to the state hospital with the idea he had a family to support, and he had the idea that he would at least be able to write because he'd be cut off from alcohol. Harlan went to visit Bud at the state hospital, and he went and talked to Bud. Bud was not in real good shape, obviously, but he got kind of excited about what Harlan talked about, because Harlan basically did what we do, which is to tell the drunk our story so that they can relate. So Bud got kind of excited about that, and he said he wanted to know more. Harlan went back the next day, and he reluctantly shared the book with Bud. Bud read the book 3 times in that week, and he was absolutely on fire with it after that. And we owe a huge debt to Bud C. because of the fact that he was a newspaper man. He was responsible for putting things in the Arkansas Gazette and the Arkansas Democrat to let people know that AA was alive and active in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Wow. I apologize right now, but you just reminded me of that movie Crazy People with Dudley Moore and Daryl Hannah. You know, he's in an insane asylum like Bud. Anyway, So Bud, he's on fire, and that's what you meant when he worked the steps. He worked them on his own through that book without a sponsor, so to speak, right? I mean, did they have such an animal at that time?
Like I said, Sterling was Harlan's sponsor, but there's a lot of information about that too. Harlan and Bud actually worked together because Harlan thought that he could relate better to Bud, because by the time he met Sterling, or Sterling met him, Sterling had already been sober for 3 or 4 years. So he never saw him drunk. They didn't have that direct relationship that Bud and Harlan developed.
I can see that.
So it eventually got to the point that Bud was keeping Harlan sober. Of course, Harlan kept getting drunk periodically, and he didn't ever manage to he finally managed to stay sober by virtue of the fact that basically Sterling went to his house and took a bottle of booze and said, "Here, drink it all, kill yourself." And that was when Harlan finally realized that he had a choice to make. He either had to get sober or he was just out of there.
That's something that I think is incredible to me, that we, in today's world, we would never, ever take a bottle of booze to someone and say, drink it all and kill yourself. But the advent of treatment in the world, I mean, and think about it, in Little Rock alone, how many treatment centers are there? And, with the state hospital as well, still exists today. But that's just something we wouldn't do. And I mean, you think about in the how it works, go to any length, what are you willing to do to get sober? And back in those days, they apparently were willing to just be blatantly honest with people. I think that's something that we lose today. We're much, much more soft and kinder about the way we do it. But, I can't even imagine taking a bottle of booze to somebody's house and doing that.
No, and on an earlier thought with this AA police thing, I got sober in '87 in New York with old timers from that generation, and these guys didn't pull any punches. The things that they did today, they would be accused of being AA police, but in those days they were like, "Who gave you permission to talk?" And I'm like, listening to this going, I'm not saying a word. I was afraid, but they also said stuff. If we chase you out of here, and they're not being nice about this. If we chase you out of here, alcohol will chase you back in, or somebody will be going to your funeral. I mean, I guess you call that tough love, but we don't see a lot of that today. We see a lot of sensitivity and, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. And of course, David, you probably gathered, Jeremy and I have a military background. We're not exactly the touchy-feely kind, so it's really kind of hard for me to be or another word is empathetic. But I'm discovering a balance, just to be fair. But to your point, yeah. I mean, that's just short of saying, if you're going to be stupid, why don't you just get in the truck and I'll take you to the liquor store. I mean, I've said that before, and I've been chastised for it. But I'm like, well, look, man, I'm tired of this guy playing with fire. Either get drunk, get stupid, or get right. And I've been told, well, you need to be more empathetic. I'm like, well, we're supposed to be in a fight for our lives here, I'm not going to coddle the guy, So I'm glad we're having this chat.
Right.
Well, I think that's one of those areas where treatment centers have pretty much imposed their way of doing things upon the fellowship. We lost a lot of our ability to deal with wet drunks when we basically stopped making 12-step calls.
That is such a great point. I never connected the dots on that before, David. That's a great point. Wow. I mean, I get it that we want to have a bona fide detox because people can die from detoxing. I get that. I didn't go to a, like a rehab. I went to jail. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I've talked to people that have done this program with and without, the treatment. And some of them are like, they were tough on me and mean. And others were like, it was like a gentleman's course. And I'm like, a gentleman's course? What does that mean? It's like wearing tennis shoes in basic training. You what? We didn't have tennis shoes in basic training, but now they do,
Right.
Well, I think that's one of those things where you find that there are a lot of differences where sitters are concerned.
Okay, so back to, I'm sorry, we got off it, and that's going to happen. So we've got these three guys, and let me just wrap my brain around this. So Harlan, got got along better with Bud because of, he was sober before, but now he can't get right. Bud gets right and really right because of the book. And Sterling shows up at Harlan's house with a bottle.
Yes.
Okay. And now are these three guys, are they the first Little Rock group?
They are part of the first Little Rock group. The first AA meeting in Arkansas was held in Sterling's parents' house, which is where Sterling was living at the time, because when he came back to Little Rock, he didn't have any money, and so he moved back into his parents' house, which happens to have been a humongous house, so been gone a long time. But, and Harlan was he wasn't at the first one, but he was at the second meeting. He was given a pass from the state hospital to go to the AA meeting.
We're talking about Bud. Bud's at the state hospital. Yeah. Okay, Bud.
And Bud became the real spokesman for AA in Arkansas, basically. I mean, Sterling was always there, but he did not have the ability to carry the message the way that Bud did. The first, I didn't ever give a date, but the first book that came to Arkansas was somewhere. It came because of a magazine article in Time magazine that told about the AA Rockefeller dinner, and that was how Sterling's bosses found out about it and decided to order the book for Sterling. That was another story. The AA Foundation wanted to know what the request was written on company stationery for the insurance company, and the AA Foundation wanted to know what this insurance company wanted the AA book for. They wanted to know if they were promoters. Anyway, Sterling basically gave them part of his story, and they said, "Oh, okay," and then they sent the book up. It's interesting to realize that as few people as we had working in New York at that particular time, that they actually had time to read all of that mail and come to conclusions about things like that. But I'm trying to decide where I was going to go with that. But.
And unfortunately, I'm going to derail you again. So I'm just trying to see the intersectional relationship between Ohio, New York, and eventually where Arkansas got into a relationship with these established recovery groups, Alcoholics Anonymous groups. Do you know how that came about? Because I mean, all I can see right now is that Bud is the only one that's. I know there's a group here, as you said, and they're meeting in Sterling's affluent parents' family house. But Bud is the only one that's gone through the book several times in 1 week, worked the steps on his own. Where I'm trying to see where they got to an established structure. You know, you're coming into a program, we want to take you through the book, whatever. You know.
When the book first got here, they didn't quite understand how to carry the message. That's actually how the Little Rock Approach program got started. It got started about a year after AA came to Arkansas. There were people they took an inventory after AA had been here for about a year, and they had managed to gather a bunch of people from time to time. They had meetings that had as many as 40 people in them, but they had a core group of about 8 people, and they just thought that they were failing. Now, by virtue of the fact that at the end of a year in the rest of the world after AA got started, there were like 2 people. So they weren't really doing that bad a job. They thought they were. Some of the people that they had collected decided that they needed to be more effective, and that was how the Little Rock Approach program got started. The guy that wrote it, Ed McKay, was one of those people that could not stay sober. This was his idea that if if we had a good structure that we would be able to carry the message better. Well, there were a lot of good things that came out of that program, some of which we still use in Little Rock, like, for instance, the worksheet talks. When we have speakers that come and find out about the Little Rock worksheet talks, they say, we think that's a great idea, but what's the worksheet got to do with it? Well, the worksheet happened to have been a sheet of paper that was given to the newcomer by his sponsor, and it had a list of names and phone numbers on it, and it was up to the newcomer to contact those people. And basically what they did was to go and hear the story of the current member, and what that did was to develop a relationship between the newcomer and the members of the fellowship. Because initially, according to the Little Rock Approach program, when you came into the fellowship, you didn't get to go to a meeting. You got to meet with your sponsor, and you had to qualify to come in. I had to write down the four qualifying questions because I knew I wouldn't remember them. The first one was, are you in your own mind convinced you cannot handle your alcoholic problem? And the second one is, are you willing to let a group of fellows who have had the same problems as yourself prescribe a course of treatment? And the third one was, will you do anything to eliminate alcohol from your life? And the fourth was, do you believe in a power greater than yourself? And you had to be able to answer yes to all of those in order to even go anywhere beyond that. The first thing that the program specified was that if you are a member and you are trying to sponsor somebody, they were called prospects. You had that, quote, prospect had to approach you and ask you. You did not go and talk to somebody that had not been, that had not asked to be helped.
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah, I did. So just one question or a couple of questions that I had. So Ed McKay, is that correct? Is that what you said his name was, that wrote the Little Rock Approach Plan? So what was the name of the first group that Bud, Harlan, and Sterling had? And so what did they call their group?
It was called the Little Rock Group.
The Little Rock Group?
Yep.
Is that group still around today?
Yes.
And
it's not called the Little Rock Group, but it's the 120 and a half group.
Okay. And then what group was Ed McKay a part of?
He was part of that group. There was only one group initially.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so personal anecdote here. So I shared with you in a pre-show chat that I had gone off the reservation after a period of sobriety and got sober again here in Arkansas. And the backstory is irrelevant. But when I got into the program, I was introduced to the table group. I had never heard of such a thing before. But what came out of that was I was called a prospect. And I thought right away, I said, I feel like I'm getting patched into a motorcycle gang, Am I going to get colors in a vest too? I've got a Harley. Why not? So, and the other thing about that was the worksheets. Absolutely foreign to me. Now, when I say I had a period of sobriety, I had a long period of sobriety, and I'd been all over the planet, and a lot of groups, and sponsored a lot of people, and all just the normal AA route, right? But I had never heard of this worksheet thing, and so that to me was one of the greatest tools ever. I was not crazy about the table group, just saying, but they were very helpful with making me do things that I had never heard of before. The case study, I never heard of that before. And the worksheets, meeting with, they gave me a list of names, and they gave me, what do you call it? Like a mantra. I don't know, something I had to say to these people to initiate. And then when I met with them, I didn't know what to expect, and it was fantastic. I had do-outs. You're going to do a worksheet. You're going to get you're going to ask several questions, and the largest thing is you need to bring back the toolbox, which I say repeatedly on this show. I got that whole terminology from that experience. So if I were required to do a worksheet with either you, Jeremy, or you, David, I would listen to your experience, strength, and hope. And I had to ask questions to confirm that I had to take back to my table group to confirm that I actually listened. And I had to have several items from the toolbox that then in turn I had to add to my own plan of action. Never heard of anything like that before. And I thought it was fantastic. And I use those things today with people that honor me with the sponsor-sponsor relationship. So yeah, so was that the essence of the Little Rock approach plan?
That group is probably the only one that uses the Little Rock approach program as the basis for what they do. Wow. There were several provisions in the plan about how you do various things and whatnot. One of the problems that they had initially was they had a very small population of members. Like I said, after the first year, they only had 8. Well, 8's an awful lot for a little.
Wife Shannon Dupree.
I have to remember that Little Rock is not that big a city, although it was about 100,000 people at the time, which means that it hasn't really grown that much. But they had, during various periods, some of these things that put publicity out there to make people aware that AA was in existence. That brings in lots of other stuff. But they had so many people coming in at one time that it would be impossible for one person to sponsor. You would end up having to sponsor about 20 people at one time if you're going to do that. So what they did, they had squads. And basically you were given a sponsor, but that sponsor might have to sponsor a whole bunch of people at the same time. And they had certain things that the sponsor had to do every day. And I don't know how in the heck you were supposed to carry on a life and do all of that too. But, you were supposed to contact each of your sponsees every day, at least in that initial period. When you came into the fellowship, you had to read the book, and you had to read it within 3 days. The reason you had to read it within 3 days was because first, I'll tell you, when I got into the program initially, if I had been able to wade through the first 164 pages in 3 days, it would have been totally a waste of time because I wouldn't have comprehended it.
Exactly. Wow.
But that was a requirement just so that, first of all, there weren't very many books around, and it was to make sure that you read the book and you got asked questions about what you had read. Now, how in the world you were supposed to remember what you had read in 3 days, I have no idea. But that was just one of the early things that you had to do, and that I can't imagine having to do that.
No, and I reflect on that table group, and I'm not dogging them. I mean, there's a place for that environment, but it was challenging for me because I'd already gone through the steps several times. But and these guys really didn't know that in the beginning, so they were talking to me like I was like I just came out from underneath a bridge, And I had a pretty good job. I was pretty well established. I was just trying to get sober again, and so I had a handful of guys, on the opposite end of the table from me, basically talking to me like, I'm a gutter drunk. And that didn't go well, especially for somebody with the ego that I shared with you that I had. And there was a couple of times when, I thought somebody was going to fly out the window and it wasn't going to be me. And so, but I stuck with it because of these tools that they had. But when they told me I had to do that reading in a concise period of time, I was like, I don't want to read that thing again. Again, lack of humility. I wasn't really ready to subject myself to guidance, especially when you have a period of sobriety and you have a lack of humility. You start thinking that you need to be telling the table group what to do, even though how long you've been sober, 48 hours. I'm going to tell you how to do it, whatever. That's just stupidity on my behalf. But these tools, they made me do things that kept me, thank you, that kept me sober because I was my ego wouldn't let me not complete those requirements. It's not like my ego was keeping me sober. It was, I'll show you. I'm going to do these things that I think are ridiculous and probably impossible, but I stuck with it. So kudos to whoever came up with that concept. Is the table? I don't know if I know we had a pre-show chat similar to this, but was the table in the Little Rock Approach group? Were they one? Were they related at all?
I can't remember exactly when the table group got started, but they were a group that, if I'm not mistaken, they met at One-Eyed Jack's during the day.
Sounds like a bar. Is that a bar?
I think it was a bar, but they met during the day. So, of course, this would be when the bar theoretically was closed.
Right.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you mentioned that you had a job and all this stuff, one of the requirements was that you had to devote 2 full weeks to the program before you were admitted as a member. And if you had a job, you had to go to your boss and request a leave of absence. If he would not give you a leave of absence, you had to quit your job.
Oh, wow. I don't know what to think about that.
Well, there were various versions of the Little Rock Approach program over the years. Things got changed as things came up, and that requirement stayed in, but they had never actually forced anybody to quit their job. But it was like one of the other requirements when you were requesting to become a member of the group. They tried to make sure that you were really serious. They'd say, well, you'll have to go to check yourself in at the state hospital, or you'll have to check yourself in at the Salvation Army or whatever. They didn't actually force anybody to do that, but they had to make sure you were willing to go to that length in order for them to even be willing to try to help you.
What kind of evolution have you seen in, from your historian position, evolution from the 30s to present day with Arkansas AA?
Well, very few groups that I know of utilize all of the things that are in the Little Rock Approach program. But we do, like I said, we still use certain things like the worksheet talks and whatnot. We pick and choose things that we think are effective. And like I said, I can't think of, other than the table group, I can't think of anybody that actually tries to utilize everything. I know that when I did my second set of steps with my second sponsor, he made me do the, whatever it's called, the case history.
Mm-hmm.
But he also made me do the worksheets with all the step stuff too. All the things that you're supposed to pull out as far as, because the worksheet talk, the case history, I never did understand exactly where that was supposed to go, except I used that as a basis for putting the information on the little form that you had to put together for your resentments and your all that other stuff. I can't tell you how much of that program is still used by anybody outside the table group.
Yeah.
We just pick and choose what we want out of it.
So, and I'm glad you asked this question earlier, Jeremy. The 120 and a half group is the oldest group this side of the Mississippi, right?
Right.
Okay, and so has that group or Arkansas AA had an influence at the national level? I mean, because it seems like those two entities pretty much came about at the same time, even though they weren't really affiliated.
I can't say that Arkansas has had any specific influence upon national AA. think that in its initial phases, Bill W. did visit Arkansas. Bud G., being a newspaperman, had gone to New York and actually had visited Bill and Lois in New York. And he was responsible. There was a tour that Bill and Lois took in 1944 or 1943-44 all over the country. They went from Little Rock to California. From New York to California first, and then they visited various places along the way. Little Rock was the last stop before they went back to New York in January of 1944. Bill actually spoke at Robinson Auditorium in January of 1944.
Whoa.
No,
that's 5 years after the book was published. Am I right? 39 is 39 when
it was published April 1939.
How many editions? I don't even know if any of us know that. You might, but how many editions of the big book had been printed by 45?
Just that first one.
Just the first one still. Okay.
Yeah, the second one didn't come out till 1955.
Okay, so and it was booming in popularity. So a lot of people knew about the program by then. Plus, you've got Bud writing. You got the Life magazine, New York Times, Times magazine. These guys are all, if I remember right, because I've got some of these facade copies. What do you call them? Not facade copies, but duplicate copies of that time, and I got them from the archives. Just because I was curious. So the news is out. So when he came here, gosh, that Robinson Auditorium, I'm assuming must have been packed. Is there any evidence of that?
We don't know how many people were there.
Yeah.
It would have been just like anything else, speculative.
How many people would we say were in the recovery program in Little Rock at that time? Did they have any idea?
I don't know that they had any numbers.
Yeah.
But as a result of Bill's being here in 1944, they were swamped with people who were asking for help after that. That was when 120 and a half became 120 and a half by virtue of the fact they had to move to bigger quarters. And that was when they moved to 120 and a half Main.
So how many groups were in Little Rock at that particular point in time? Just 120 and a half, or were there more groups?
By that time, there were several others. There were certain things that happened along the way, one of which was the no women rule.
What? Okay, you got to share that with us. That's what?
Well, there was
the He-Man Woman Hater Club. Is that
in the very first group there was at least one woman, the very first year, but apparently that was not very common, and somewhere in the early period, 3 ladies ended up in the group, and apparently one of those was someone who cared more about companionship than she did about getting sober. And so there was this evening when somebody found out that there was a group of AA members that were meeting in a hotel, and it apparently included at least 3 regular members, and they were going and providing the alcohol that was being utilized.
They didn't call this the dirty 30s for nothing. Oh, wait, this is 40s now, right?
Right.
Okay. Bless.
Anyway, as a result of that evening, there was a meeting held by the AA group, and they put down the rule: no more women.
Wow.
How long did that last?
Well, basically, it lasted until the Cosmopolitan group was formed. There were groups that had women in them, but we were segregated between males and females for a period of time.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go off the res for a sec. I think, because I was raised old school, and I'm just going to say I disagree with it, but it's just bizarre to me where I see males sponsoring females and females sponsoring males. Based on what you just said right there, lends all the credibility in the world why I'm pretty monolithic or passionate about males sponsoring males and females sponsoring females. Now, I've seen it out there. No judgment, man. If it works for y'all, great. But I've just seen it go south. And I absolutely, males and females are both humans. They got it. They got to get sober. I couldn't agree with the segregation. I couldn't agree with that at all, because people bring tools to the table. They bring experiences to I want to hear everybody's. But when it comes down to working personal intimate relationships, I subscribe to staying in my lane. I don't want to be the AA police.
Dr. Bob was very reluctant to sponsor women because he didn't feel qualified and he didn't feel comfortable, and I understand that. They're one of the very first women members in Little Rock. Had to be sponsored by a male because she was the only female.
That's right. I could see that
was there. I mean, you either had a male sponsor or you didn't get one.
That's right.
So we have to be a little bit flexible sometimes.
Yeah. Well, if this program has taught me anything, it has taught me to be flexible, as you said. I always have to. One of you two said it earlier when we were talking about the triangle. We have to keep in mind that people are in a fight for their lives. I have temporarily sponsored individuals until we had an agreement, until you find somebody to be a sponsor, but I'm not going to leave anybody hanging. And in the military, especially in the military, when we counsel a subordinate, that's of the opposite sex, I always kept the door open, and so if I get put in a position to temporarily sponsor somebody of the opposite sex, I immediately share that with my sponsor, my tribe, and of course my wife, just for accountability purposes. I don't have I by no stretch of the imagination have a angelic past. Sobriety has helped me to, through the steps to come to grips with my history and be the good boy and move forward and do righteous things. But I don't ever want to think for a moment I'm cured. And not only from alcohol, but there's other things out there that can trip a fella up, and I my sobriety means more to me than life itself, because without sobriety, I got no life. And so I've got to be very cognizant of things. But at the same time, I got to remember that poor suffering alcoholic may also be a female. And so I thank God, you guys got a great group. You got a great group. Bridging the Gap is awesome. We have a very good group. We've got ladies in the group, and I try to encourage that temporary situation. Usually it happens because I'm at a treatment facility and I can't introduce them to one of my peers. So I do the game there. So I need to clarify why that even happens. But I make it clear to them, hey, I'm going to introduce you to some of the ladies in our group that are awesome. And if our ladies weren't available, I know some ladies in your group that are, so I digress.
Yeah, no, I think the other side of that too is, for me, I have to be able to relate to what it's like to be a female trying to get sober. I know what it's like to be a male trying to get sober, but I don't know what it's like to be a female getting sober. It's I guess I look at it the same concept as, me trying to get somebody sober from another fellowship, right? That's just not, that's my ego saying that I know how that feels and what that's like.
Well, I've mentioned the show on the show before, and I talk about it openly in treatment centers, where I try to encourage people to stay out of relationships for a year. And it's not like a founded rule. We know that, but it's encouraged so we can work on ourselves, because a lot of us find our in a sense our dopamine by having a relationship, and especially when our illicits are removed and now we're starting to actually feel again. People want to feel like they should be in a relationship, and it's like, hey, this is like a test for you, pal. This is an opportunity to really get to know yourself better, chum with your sponsor, build a tribe, those things. But when a relationship's meant to happen, it'll happen. But if you kind of push that thing, and if it becomes more important than your sobriety, relationships can be one of the first things that we lose, but We can't fire some. Well, we can fire anybody we want. We can be fired as sponsors, but I'm always gentle in that area because I don't want to sound like I'm somebody's guru either. You know, as a sponsor, hey, my job is really get them through the steps, kind of answer questions, but I don't want to be the AA Nazi there, you know, or what have you. Because I can be. In a second, I can bring out that old soldier or the old Marine, right? And I know you're a dumbass. Get in the truck. Taking you to the liquor store. You know, I don't want to be that guy. I actually have people today that tell me they like me. I'm not used to that.
I know. So a question to go back to what you were talking about, David. So this is taking place in the 40s where women are not allowed into the meetings. So we know that especially during that time, particularly all the way up until the civil rights movement in the 40s or into the 60s, rather, you know, we didn't have women, you know, really didn't have many rights at all, nor did Black Americans at that particular point in time either. So women weren't allowed in meetings. Black Americans were not allowed in meetings, I assume.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, in the pre-show chat, you guys were talking about Joe. You want to hit on that again? Is that okay if I jump in on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you guys had talked about that and got my interest.
Joe McHugh got sober in 1962, and the 120 and a half group had moved by that time. Urban Renewal did away with 120 and a half Main, so they had to move. Well, they had already moved several times before and after that. They were meeting at the, what's that house down on Spring Street? I knew I would forget. But
It's okay.
Anyway, they let Joe come to the meetings, but he could not come inside. He had to sit outside on the fort, on the porch, on the steps.
Wow. I can't even wrap my brain around that, especially I shared with you before. I had got turned on to his YouTube videos and I was just amazed at the wealth of knowledge and the poise that this man had. And of course, we live in an era now where, well, most of us, I'm sure there's still some environmentally dysfunctional people out there, or we call them ignorant or whatever. I looked at Joe as a mentor. You know, yeah, I'm white, he's black, but I don't see that. It just doesn't. And in this day and age, unless somebody's trying to push an agenda, I don't see it. And then I shared with you that I found out he was deceased, and I did not know what you had said now and in the pre-show chat. How could you, I mean, it's like Rosa Parks in the back row, but I just can't even wrap my brain around doing that to a human being. You know? and for Joe, again, me only knowing him from YouTube videos and how incredibly articulate and insightful this man is with recovery. I listened to everything I could get my hands on with this guy. I have his book. It's right here in the library. The Steps We Took. Just amazing. I had never knew the backstory of his challenged beginnings in sobriety until you shared that. And on one hand, it upsets me, but on the other hand, I'm like, okay, that's in the past. I get it. Let's move on. But did you say that he also went to other states and the same thing had happened, or was that just here in Arkansas?
That's the only part that I even know about.
Okay.
Of course, he had just checked him, or just been checked out of the state hospital at that particular time too. So at that particular time in the early days, we certainly didn't have treatment centers at that point, because although Joe eventually had one, he didn't have access to one, and state hospital was one of the few places that you could actually get detox if you were trying to avoid coming down with the DTs.
Right.
And I'm very grateful that I did not live during that period. I visited a detox very briefly one time, and luckily I didn't really need detoxing. It was more a matter of putting myself in a position where the people that I had been around were not able to get a hold of me. So
there are certain things in my recovery that I will never forget, and detoxing is one of them. I didn't have that issue, like you said. Well, the second time I came in, I experienced a lot of bad stuff. But to see somebody, so my sponsor, I got sober in New York the first time. My sponsor took me to this ward where people were coming off of heroin. I never had heroin, and I never crossed paths, and that could still be one of my yets. I just don't want to say I'll never do that, because I've learned that there's a lot of things I said I'd never do, until I was introduced to alcohol. But my sponsor took me there. I had no idea what we were doing. He just said, go, and, get in the car. I went, and somebody sat me down next to a teenager. And she was only like maybe 6 years younger than me at the time, right? And in her bed, and she was profusely sweating, and she gripped my hand. I felt like she had the power of the exorcist, just squeezing my hand. And she just looked at me. She goes, I don't want to die. And I was like, well, I don't want you to die either, and I was kind of freaked out over this. And we left. Larry was my sponsor's name. And I was like, why did you do that? And he said, well, there's a few things I want you to gather out of this. And that one is that you're blessed you're not her, or them, because there was a bunch of people in there. And it wasn't like they had individual rooms. It was like a military bay, all these people in beds. He said, the other thing is you need to sort of learn to love other people that are going through stuff. And it was that was completely foreign to me. I was like, I don't need to love anybody. This journey is about me, and then, we get introduced to people like you and Jeremy, David. You guys probably went through similar paths, but now you're at a point where you're encouraging other people. The only way that we're ever going to stay, on a righteous path is to learn to give it away, give something that was given us so freely. And so, the one thing I didn't ask you, and as we kind of move towards a close, people are wired. We're all wired differently. I have no desires at all. I can't even see myself doing some of the things that our friends have done at the district level, and definitely at the area level. I'm just not wired for that. I'll support my friends if my friends need backup, and you guys are my friends. If you need some help with something, I'll do it. But to actually get into the nitty gritty and hold that title, I'm not wired for that. Just not. But I am wired to, hey, have I done my service work this week? And if I get a random call from one of you guys saying, hey, this is what you're going to do, you're going to do it. I say all that to say that I never understood archives. I've met a lot of people that have done archives. I'm not a history buff. I like history. I taught history. I actually was a school teacher for a while. But tell me two things. One, and they're different questions in the same arena, and I'll ask them both of you at the same time. And if you need me to remind you, I will. A, why is history of Alcoholics Anonymous serious, or why is it important at all? And that's the first question. And you can answer either one of these in whichever order you wish. Why did you get involved in archives? How are you wired for that? What happened? I should have asked you that in the very beginning, but I didn't think of it. So here we go. Boom.
Bill W. started the archives at the General Service Office before he died, even though it didn't actually become a working part of the General Service Office until 1974, I think. He died in 1971. But he had a secretary, Nell Wing, and one of her main jobs was to collect things. So she collected materials having to do with what was going on in the General Service Office through the period of time from she got hired in around 1950. And so she was the first archivist when it was established in the mid-70s. Bill had her do that so that all of the history of how Alcoholics Anonymous came to be was recorded, so that it would not get distorted, and so that we would know how it happened, as opposed to what people said happened. We know that Bill W. was one of the worst about not letting a good story be screwed up by facts. Yeah. So it would have
well said.
It would have been very easy for all of that to get distorted. That's one of the main reasons why we still have archives as far as AA is concerned. I got involved sort of through the back door. The person that was associate archivist at the time that I was asked to do it, actually when I was asked to do it, two other people were asked to do it at the same time. One of those swore that he was never actually asked, and the other one said he didn't have time to do it. So I ended up doing it. But the reason that I ended up doing that was, first of all, the person that had at that time was associate archivist also had about 4 or 5 other AA service jobs that she was trying to do. And she just decided that she couldn't do them all. So she was trying to find somebody to fill that bill. And she asked my current sponsor, who he wasn't my sponsor at the time, but he recommended that I do it. So that was when I decided that I would try to find out a little bit more about what archives was. So I started going to the district archives committee just to find out what it was. Unfortunately, before that first year visiting the archives in District 9 was over, I was the chairman of that committee. So you have to be careful about what you agree to do. Basically, that was how I got started. Perry was our archivist at the time, and he was looking for an associate, somebody to help him. And that was how of course, that's how he got started too, because Faye was looking for somebody to help her. When that's basically where you end up getting somebody to assist you, because you can't do it all. So I got involved in it, and I didn't have any idea what I was doing. Perry did tried to help me learn what I was doing, except that as I got to the point, I can be good about deciding that even though you've been doing it for 30 years, now that I'm doing it, I think that my way is better.
Okay.
So it eventually got to the point where I can understand how it happened very easily, that Harry basically quit doing everything and I was doing it all. So
how long were you in the archives arena?
I started, I was made associate archivist in the middle of 2009.
Was that for the district or the area of the state?
We only have one official archives.
Okay.
District 1 has an archive of their own. And initially, when we started archives in Arkansas, every district had their own archive. But it was decided fairly early on that it was too much work for District 9, which is the Little Rock area, to have their own archives, because the same people were trying to do all the work for the district and the area. So they decided that they just put all the District 9 stuff in the Area 4 archives, which is where all of what little there is as far as the rest of the state is concerned is collected. Unfortunately, no matter how many times you beg them for their information, unless you actually manually go there and say, I'm not leaving until you give it to me, you don't end up with anything. So outside of the District 9 stuff, there's not a whole lot of stuff in the area archives.
So you were involved in archives, 14, 15 years?
Yeah.
Good night. I mean, I am impressed, because I did my stint as a GSR and ran, alternate GSR, then GSR, ran, and that's 4 years right there. Mm-hmm. I'm in the treatment committee now, which I love to death, but I won't kid you, I'm looking forward to my time being up. And that'll be 6 years, and I haven't held any other positions, even though we know there are plenty others. And, we're not allowed to say no. This is not just about us anymore, so I'm sure I'll get roped into something else. But 14 years, 15 years in archives, and having to deal with the sensitivity. I mean, that's the only place, when we go to the conventions, leave your food and drinks outside, because there's some important stuff. And I go in and look at the relics and when they have those things for sale, like I've gone to GSO, I've been to Bill's house and Bob's house, I've been to the Akron committee, and on the road trips with the guys on the tribe, we bounce around. I pick up these artifacts, duplicates, copies of the artifacts, and I can see why it's not just a job where you're collecting knowledge that you're sharing, but you're also, the gatekeeper to protect this stuff. And now, are they building another archives place? Cosmo
is supposedly renovating Cosmo 3 to house the archives.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, as we come closer to a close, I mean, we could go on forever. In fact, that's probably a good segue for me to ask you this. Now that you've kind of been introduced to Shout Out from the Pit, and we've, talked about a lot of different stuff here, I'd like to invite you back in the future, David, if you think, I know you see Jeremy quite often. If you could, if something comes to your mind, you guys are chatting like, hey, this particular topic would be good for archives, for, podcasts. One or both of you just reach out to me and we can easily do another show, easily. So it's not like I want this to be the end of the road for archive chat. There might be some other great topics along this line that we can entertain in the future. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. And now on this other subject, along these lines, we invite the listening audience, if they have questions about archives, to write our show at shoutoutfromthepit.com. They can reach us through so many different ways on that website. If they send me a question I vet it, can I forward that to you for an answer? Or okay, good. And I appreciate that, because there's no way that I can answer some of these questions. I've learned a lot here today. Before we come back to you, Jeremy, you have any closing thoughts, questions, or anything?
No, I would like to say thank you, David. I've learned a lot here today. I still have so many more questions that could be asked on a later show, or you and I can talk about later on offline. But, just your knowledge of history of Alcoholics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous in Arkansas, I think is tremendous. I think it's fantastic that we have people like you that maintain that history, because, I know that when you did the National AA Archives Workshop here in Little Rock a couple of years ago, y'all's slogan was, does archives carry the message? And the answer is absolutely yes. We have to look back on our history just like we do, in America. We have to look back at our history to see where we were, to understand where we're going and where we want to be. And I think that needs to be kept alive. So thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's a poignant observation, because, the old adage, if we don't study history, we're doomed to repeat it. And you brought up a couple things I had never heard of. I can't even imagine somebody sitting outside of a meeting because they're not allowed to come in, whether a female or a gender, even transgenders today. If somebody were to say, you can't come in because you don't know if you're a man or a woman, that would piss me off. I'm like, that's a drunk trying to get right, So I think we need to know those things. And good point. Any observations, thoughts, or something you'd like to share with us in closing? Jeremy, David.
No, I'll just say thank you for asking me. I can't think of anything that I don't have any pearls of wisdom to cast upon the waters.
Well, I pray this relationship's not over, because there's a lot more. And as you and Jeremy do, Chad, if you could take some mental notes, that we could do a subsequent show, and then you can bring those points with you and just ask, and they'll refresh in your memory. I know we chatted earlier. You had said there is so much in the archives that you wouldn't even know where to begin. I could see that in just the way we did the show, because I don't have an outline. It's just shoot from the hip chat, but I can see the opportunity for a subsequent show in the future. So okay. All right. So Jeremy, David, thank you as always. You guys bless me. I absolutely love this platform, and I love meeting new friends. So now instead of just seeing you at conventions going, hey, I can say, hey, right? All right. So That's it, folks. Thanks again for listening, and please share our show with folks that could use some encouragement and extra tools for their recovery journey. And be sure to subscribe at shoutoutfromthepit.com for future episodes. It's for free and for fun. Remember, you are not alone. And if no one's told you they love you today, we love you. So again, I'm Bob the Old Rucker, praying you're having an outstanding American Day. God bless you and peace out.